Imagine waking up to the same alarm, the same routine, the same quiet pressure sitting on your chest before your feet even touch the floor. It's not that you're lazy. It's not that you don't work hard. In fact, you've been doing everything you were told would work. You got the job, you show up on time, you put in the hours, maybe even more than required. Or maybe you run a small business, opening early, closing late, carrying the weight of everything on your shoulders. And yet, no matter how consistent you are, no matter how disciplined you try to be, something doesn't add up. The numbers don't move the way they should. The progress never feels real. And deep down, there's a quiet question you don't always say out loud. Why does it feel like I'm working this hard and still not getting ahead? That question is where everything starts. Because what most people don't realize is that the problem isn't just how hard they're working, it's how they're working. And the way most people work today is quietly designed to keep them stuck in the same financial position year after year. Take Daniel, for example. He's 35, works a stable government job, earns about $52,000 a year. On paper, that's not bad. It's actually close to the median income in the United States, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. He pays his rent, keeps up with bills, even manages to save a little here and there. But by the time everything is paid for, housing, food, transportation, insurance, there's barely anything left. At the end of the year, his savings might grow by $1,000, maybe $2,000 if nothing unexpected happens. Now stretch that over 10 years. That's $10,000 to $20,000 saved after a decade of consistent work. At first, that sounds responsible, until you realize that during that same 10-year period, inflation alone, which has averaged around 2 to 3% annually and spiked much higher in recent years according to Federal Reserve data, quietly eats away at the value of that money. What felt like progress is actually just maintenance. He isn't moving forward. He's standing still. And that's the first hidden way people keep themselves broke without realizing it, relying entirely on a single source of income that grows too slowly to ever create real wealth. It doesn't feel dangerous because it feels normal, safe, predictable. But that safety comes at a cost most people never calculate. If Daniel loses that job, even temporarily, his entire financial structure collapses. One stream of income means one point of failure. And according to a 2023 Federal Reserve report, nearly 37% of Americans would struggle to cover a $400 emergency without borrowing or selling something. That's not because they're irresponsible. It's because their income structure was never built to support real stability in the first place. Now look at someone like Karen, who runs a small retail shop. She works even harder than Daniel, 12-hour days sometimes, weekends included. Her revenue looks decent, maybe $120,000 a year, but after expenses, rent, inventory, and staff, her actual take-home might not be very different from Daniel's salary. And yet, she believes the answer is to work more, open earlier, close later, push harder. But there's a limit to how much effort can produce. This is where the second hidden pattern shows up, working more hours instead of building leverage. Because time is finite. No matter how disciplined you are, you only get 24 hours in a day. And when your income is directly tied to those hours, your earning potential is automatically capped. It doesn't matter how motivated you are. There's a ceiling you cannot break through by effort alone. According to data from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, countries with longer average working hours do not necessarily produce higher wealth per individual. In fact, some of the highest earning economies rely more on productivity and systems rather than raw hours worked. That's a critical distinction most people miss. Karen feels productive. She feels busy, but her business isn't scalable in its current form. It depends entirely on her presence. If she steps away, everything slows down. That's not leverage, that's dependency. And this is where frustration starts to build, even if it's subtle. You're doing more, but getting the same results. You're tired, but nothing is changing. Then comes the third pattern, and this one is even quieter. It shows up in small decisions, almost invisible ones. Daniel gets a raise, an extra $300 a month. At first, it feels like progress, but slowly, without even noticing, his lifestyle adjusts. Maybe he upgrades his phone, eats out a little more, subscribes to a few more services. Nothing extreme, nothing reckless, just small upgrades that feel deserved after working hard. By the end of the year, that extra $300 is gone. Not saved, not invested, just absorbed. This is what researchers call lifestyle inflation. And according to a study published in the Journal of Consumer Research, a significant majority of people increase their spending as their income rises, often at a rate that cancels out any real financial improvement. What makes this dangerous is that it doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like progress. It feels like reward. But over time, it becomes one of the biggest reasons people stay stuck. Because if your expenses grow at the same rate as your income, your financial position never actually changes. And the numbers behind this are more serious than they seem. If Daniel had taken that extra $300 a month and invested it consistently into a simple index fund, averaging 7% annually, a figure often referenced in long-term market data, he could have accumulated over $50,000 in 10 years. Over 20 years, that number grows closer to $150,000. Instead, it disappears into upgraded habits that leave no long-term impact. That's not just spending, that's lost opportunity. And this is where most people begin to feel something they can't quite explain. A sense that time is passing, effort is being made, but the results aren't matching the input. Karen feels it when she closes her shop late at night and realizes she's been working for years but hasn't truly moved forward. Daniel feels it when he checks his bank account at the end of the month and sees the same pattern repeating. It's not failure, it's structure. The way they're working, the way most people are working, is built around stability, not growth. Around effort, not leverage. Around income, not wealth. And the system doesn't correct this for you. It reinforces it. You're encouraged to work harder, not differently. To earn more, not build more. To stay consistent, not question the structure itself. That's why people can spend 10, 15, even 20 years doing everything right and still feel like they're in the same place financially. But once you start seeing these patterns clearly, something shifts. You begin to realize that the issue isn't motivation. It isn't discipline. It isn't even intelligence. It's the model. And models can be changed. Not instantly. Not without effort. But they can be changed. Because the people who eventually break out of this cycle don't do it by pushing harder in the same direction. They do it by stepping back and asking a different question entirely. What am I doing that feels productive, but is actually keeping me stuck? That question doesn't just lead to answers. It leads to awareness. And awareness is where control begins. Because once you see that relying on one income stream limits you, you start thinking about building another. Once you understand that time-based work has a ceiling, you start looking for leverage. Once you recognize lifestyle inflation, you start redirecting money instead of just spending it. And slowly, the pattern begins to shift. Not dramatically at first, but noticeably, because you're no longer just working. You're thinking, and that changes everything. What most people don't realize is that these first few patterns are only the surface. There are deeper forces at play, structural, psychological, and financial systems that quietly shape how people earn, spend, and stay stuck without ever questioning it. And until those are understood, most people will keep repeating the same cycle, just at different income levels. The next step isn't about working harder. It's about seeing the system clearly enough to stop playing it the same way. And that's where everything begins to change. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no dramatic moment where everything falls apart and forces you to change. It's quieter than that. It shows up in patterns, the same numbers, the same stress, the same feeling that no matter how much effort you put in, something is holding you in place. And by the time most people start questioning it, they've already spent years inside a system they never fully understood. Daniel starts noticing it first in small ways. His rent increases again. Groceries cost more than they did a year ago. Gas, insurance, basic utilities, everything edges upward slowly but consistently. His salary, on the other hand, barely moves. Maybe a 2% raise if he's lucky. But inflation, especially in recent years, hasn't been that gentle. According to data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, inflation in 2022 peaked above 8%, the highest in decades. That means even though Daniel is technically earning more, he's actually losing purchasing power. And that's one of the most overlooked ways people stay stuck, earning income that doesn't outpace the system around them. It's not obvious because nothing feels like it's collapsing. Bills are still being paid. Life goes on, but quietly, year after year, the gap widens. What used to feel manageable starts to feel tight. What used to feel like progress starts to feel like maintenance. If Daniel's expenses rise just $200 a month due to inflation, which is $2,400 a year, but his salary only increases by $1,200 annually, he's effectively moving backward by $1,200 every year. Over 10 years, that's a $12,000 loss in real financial position. Not from bad decisions, but from a system that slowly shifts against him. Karen experiences the same thing, but from a different angle. Her business revenue increases slightly each year, but so do her costs. Rent, supplies, wages. What look like growth on paper turns out to be neutral in reality. She's working harder to stay in the same place. This is where many small business owners get trapped. They believe revenue growth equals progress, but what actually matters is scalable profit. According to a 2023 report from the Small Business Administration, over 60% of small businesses operate with thin profit margins, often below 10%. That means even small increases in costs can erase years of effort. And because Karen is still operating in a model that depends entirely on her time and presence, she can't easily adjust. She's locked into a system that grows slowly, but costs rise quickly. But the deeper issue isn't just inflation or expenses. It's how people respond to them. When pressure builds, most people don't step back and rethink their strategy. They react. They work more hours. They pick up extra shifts. They push harder inside the same structure that's already limiting them. And that leads to another pattern, confusing effort with progress. It feels productive to stay busy. It feels responsible to keep grinding. But if the structure you're working within has limits, then all you're doing is reaching those limits faster. There's a point where more effort doesn't produce more results. It just produces more exhaustion. Daniel feels it when he takes on overtime, thinking the extra income will help him get ahead, only to realize most of it gets absorbed into taxes and higher expenses. According to the Tax Policy Center, marginal tax rates mean that additional income is often taxed at higher rates, reducing the real benefit of working extra hours. That doesn't mean earning more is bad. It means without a strategy, the impact is smaller than expected. Karen feels it when she works weekends to increase sales, only to see the extra revenue disappear into operating costs. The business grows, but her personal financial position doesn't. And then there's the trap that quietly sits behind all of this: debt. Not extreme debt, not reckless spending, just normal, everyday borrowing that slowly builds over time. A credit card used for emergencies, a car loan, Maybe a personal loan to cover a shortfall. None of it feels dangerous in the moment. It feels necessary. But over time, it creates a constant drain. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, total U.S. household debt exceeded $17 trillion in 2023, with credit card balances alone surpassing $1 trillion. The average interest rate on credit cards has climbed above 20% in recent years. That means every dollar carried as debt isn't just a dollar owed. It's a dollar actively working against you. If Daniel carries a $5,000 balance on a credit card at 20% interest and only makes minimum payments, he could end up paying over $2,000 in interest alone over time. That's money that produces nothing. No asset, no return, just cost. And this is where the system becomes even more subtle. Because while people are losing money through inflation, taxes, and debt, they're also being influenced in how they spend what's left. Everywhere Daniel looks, there's a message telling him what his life should look like. Better car, better apartment, better lifestyle. And even if he resists most of it, small pieces slip through. A subscription here, a convenience there, small upgrades that feel harmless. But those small decisions compound. Spending an extra $10 a day doesn't feel significant. But over a year, that's $3,650. Over 10 years, that's $36,500. And if that same money had been invested at a modest return, it could easily exceed $50,000 or more. That's not just spending. That's a quiet transfer of future wealth into present comfort. Karen faces a similar pressure in her business. She invests in things that feel necessary but don't actually drive growth. Minor upgrades, unnecessary inventory, decisions based on comfort instead of strategy. It keeps the business running, but it doesn't move it forward. And underneath all of this is one of the most powerful forces keeping people stuck: lack of financial awareness. Not intelligence, not capability, just awareness. According to the FINRA Investor Education Foundation, only about 1/3 of Americans demonstrate basic financial literacy. That means most people are making decisions about money without fully understanding the long-term impact of those decisions. It's not that they can't learn. It's that they were never taught. No one explained how compound interest works in a way that made it real. No one showed how small, consistent investments could outperform large, inconsistent ones. No one broke down how systems of income, expense, and growth actually interact over time. So people operate on instinct, on habits, on what feels right in the moment. And the system doesn't correct that. It depends on it. Because when you combine slow income growth, rising costs, debt, social pressure, and limited financial awareness, you get a cycle that is incredibly difficult to break. Not because it's impossible, but because it's invisible. Daniel isn't failing. Karen isn't doing something wrong. They're both operating exactly the way most people do. And that's the problem. Because average behavior produces average results. And in a system like this, average often means staying stuck. But something begins to shift once these patterns become clear. Daniel starts noticing where his money actually goes. Not just the big expenses, but the small ones. The patterns, the habits, the decisions that feel normal but add up over time. Karen starts questioning her business model. Not just how hard she works, but how the business itself functions. Where the bottlenecks are, where growth is being limited. And for the first time, they're not just reacting to the system. They're observing it. That's the turning point. Because once you can see the structure clearly, you're no longer controlled by it in the same way. You start asking better questions. Not, how do I work more, but where's my effort actually going? Not, how do I earn more, but why isn't what I earn building anything? And those questions lead somewhere different. Because the truth is, most people never get rich working the way they're working. Not because it's impossible, but because the system they're in was never designed to produce that outcome. It produces stability. It produces consistency. But wealth requires something else entirely. And that's where the final shift begins. Not in effort, not in income, but in strategy. By the time most people reach this point, something inside them has already shifted. Not completely, not all at once, but enough to know that continuing the same way won't lead anywhere different. Daniel feels it in the quiet moments now. Not panic, not fear, just clarity. The numbers he used to glance at without thinking now mean something. The patterns are no longer invisible. The routine that once felt normal now feels limited. Karen feels it too. For years, she believed her business would eventually take off if she just stayed consistent. But now she sees the truth more clearly. Consistency without direction doesn't create growth, it just maintains the current level. And maintaining is not the same as progressing. This is where most people stand at a crossroads, whether they realize it or not. Because once you understand that the way you've been working is keeping you stuck, the next step isn't to abandon everything overnight. It's to restructure how money flows through your life. That's where real change begins. Daniel doesn't quit his job. That would be emotional, not strategic. Instead, he starts treating his job differently. It's no longer his entire plan, it's his base layer. Something that covers his essentials while he builds something else on top of it. And that shift alone changes how he thinks. Instead of spending everything left at the end of the month, he flips the order. He decides that a fixed portion of his income, even if it's small, gets redirected before anything else happens. Not after bills, not after comfort. Before. This is a principle that's been used for decades across different cultures and financial systems, often called paying yourself first. It's not new, and it's not complicated, but it's one of the most ignored strategies in modern personal finance. According to historical wealth-building practices, including early 20th century investment strategies documented in works like The Richest Man in Babylon, individuals who consistently set aside even 10% of their income and invested it intelligently were able to build long-term financial security regardless of starting point. Daniel starts smaller, maybe 5%. But the key isn't the percentage. It's the consistency. Because once money is removed from the cycle of spending, it becomes available for something else, building. And this is where the second major shift happens. Instead of letting his money sit idle, Daniel starts learning how to make it work. Not in extreme, risky ways, but in simple, structured ones. Index funds, retirement accounts, basic investment vehicles that compound over time. According to long-term data from the S&P 500, the average annual return has historically hovered around 7 to 10% when adjusted for inflation. That means money invested consistently doesn't just sit, it grows. Quietly, steadily, often unnoticed at first. If Daniel invests $200 a month consistently at a 7% return, in 10 years that becomes over $34,000. In 20 years, it crosses $100,000. Not from a large starting point, but from discipline and time. That's the difference between saving and investing. Saving preserves money. Investing multiplies it. Karen's shift looks different, but the principle is the same. She stops asking, "How can I work more?" and starts asking, "Where's my business limited?" And the answer becomes obvious once she looks closely enough. Everything depends on her. So she begins making small changes that feel uncomfortable at first. She documents her processes, delegates simple tasks, experiments with online sales, even if it's just a small portion of her business. It's not perfect, it's not smooth, but it's different. And different is what creates movement. Because once a business starts generating income without requiring constant direct effort, even in small amounts, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a system. According to a 2022 report by McKinsey & Company, Businesses that implement even basic digital and operational systems see productivity increases of up to 20 to 30% over time. That's not just efficiency, that's leverage. Karen isn't just working in her business anymore. She's slowly building something that can operate beyond her. And that's where the real separation begins. Because the difference between people who stay stuck and people who move forward isn't effort, it's structure. People who stay stuck continue trading time for money. People who move forward start separating the two. Daniel begins exploring ways to earn outside his job. Not massive ventures, just small extensions of his skills. Freelance work, consulting, anything that creates an additional stream, even if it starts small. At first, it's inconsistent, but over time it stabilizes. And this is where something important happens. His dependence on a single income source begins to weaken. Not disappear, just weaken. And that changes everything. Because once you're no longer dependent on one source, your risk profile changes. Your decisions change. Your confidence changes. According to a 2021 report by Morgan Stanley, individuals with multiple income streams are significantly more financially resilient, especially during economic downturns. It's not just about earning more, it's about reducing vulnerability. Karen experiences a similar shift when her online sales start bringing in consistent revenue. It's not replacing her main income yet, but it's enough to show her what's possible. And possibility is powerful, because once you see that income can come from something other than direct effort, your entire perspective expands. But even with these changes, one challenge remains: discipline. Because building wealth isn't just about earning and investing. It's about not losing what you build. And this is where many people fall back into old patterns. Lifestyle inflation doesn't disappear just because income increases. If anything, it becomes more tempting. Better income creates more opportunities to spend. And without awareness, those opportunities quietly erase progress. Daniel faces this when his side income starts growing. The temptation to upgrade his lifestyle is immediate. But now he sees it differently. He understands the cost, not just in dollars, but in time and lost growth. So instead of upgrading everything, he upgrades selectively and continues directing a portion of his income toward assets. Karen does the same. Instead of taking all her increased profits as personal income, she reinvests strategically, improving systems, expanding reach, building something that continues to grow. This is another principle that shows up repeatedly across global wealth-building strategies: reinvestment. From early merchant traders in Europe to modern entrepreneurs, the pattern is consistent. Wealth grows when profits are cycled back into productive assets rather than consumed entirely. And this is where the final shift becomes clear. Wealth isn't built by working more. It's built by owning things that grow. Assets, systems, investments, structures that continue producing value over time. According to the Federal Reserve's survey of consumer finances, the majority of wealth in the United States is held by individuals who own appreciating assets, stocks, real estate, businesses, not those who rely solely on earned income. That's not a coincidence. It's a pattern. And once Daniel and Karen understand this, their decisions begin to align differently. They're no longer just working to earn. They're working to build. And that's a completely different game. Because when you build, effort doesn't disappear, it compounds. Time doesn't get traded, it gets leveraged. Money doesn't get spent, it gets deployed. And slowly, almost quietly, the cycle that once kept them stuck begins to break. Not overnight, not perfectly, but consistently. And that's what most people never get to see. They only see the outcome, the financial freedom, the stability, the growth. They don't see the shift in thinking that made it possible. But that shift is available to anyone willing to step back, question the way they've been working, and start making small, intentional changes. Because in the end, the difference isn't luck. It isn't talent. It's understanding that the way most people work will never make them rich, and having the awareness to do something different about it.